The glass shattered against the wall, red wine sliding down the white tile like blood. "You're looking at me like I'm a monster again," Eric hissed, stepping closer. His shadow swallowed the light above the kitchen island. "I'm just tired," Maya whispered. "Tired? Of what? Of having a house, a husband, everything you could possibly need?" He moved closer, his hand curling into a fist. "Or tired because I won't let you waste my money on those ridiculous painting classes?" Each word hit harder than the last. She saw it in his eyes, the familiar flicker of madness, the spark that always came before the pain. "I never asked for luxury, Eric. I just wanted respect." "Respect?" He laughed, low and humorless. "A woman who can't keep her mouth shut at dinner wants respect?" His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Pain burst through her arm like fire. "Let go," her voice cracked, but it wasn't a scream, just a rasp. "Say you're sorry," he demanded. "No." The slap came fast, a sharp sound, like glass breaking again. Maya didn't scream. She froze instead. And in that silence, in that hollow stillness inside her, something broke for good. When he turned away to pour himself another drink, she quietly opened the drawer. Her passport. The envelope of cash. Everything she needed to disappear. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice behind her. She didn't turn around. "For some air." "At 3 a.m? The door slammed before he could take a step. Cold rain lashed her face, mixing with the warm sting of blood on her cheek. Her heart pounded somewhere in her throat, but her legs kept running. A taxi stopped at the corner, headlights cutting through the dark. "Airport," she rasped, collapsing into the seat. Denver drowned in rain. Neon lights bled across puddles like warnings, "You can still turn back." But Maya knew there was no way back. An hour later, she stood at the ticket counter. Her wet hair clung to her temples, her hands trembled as she handed over her passport. One ticket. One way. Anywhere. "There's a flight to New York in 40 minutes, the clerk said. When boarding was announced, Maya looked up at the black glass of the window, and for the first time in 2 years, she drew a full breath. The night behind her already felt unreal, like a nightmare fading at dawn. Only the bruise on her cheek reminded her it had been real. The cabin smelled of warm metal and sleep. Maya sat by the window, clutching her bag to her chest, the only thing she had left. The engines hummed, a low vibration running through the floor, as if the plane itself were gathering courage before leaping into the dark. When a tall man in a dark suit appeared in the aisle, she barely looked up, until he stopped beside her row. "Excuse me," his voice was low and calm, with a faint rasp, like someone used to being obeyed quietly. "My seat's by the window." Maya stood quickly to let him pass. His hand brushed the seat back, strong, precise, the hand of a man accustomed to control. He sat down beside her. The faint scent of leather, tobacco, and something cool and expensive hung around him. Maya felt uneasy in his presence, and yet somehow safer than she had in months. She tried not to look, but her gaze slid over his profile anyway, short dark hair, a sharply defined jaw, a face that belonged to another world. He looked composed, untouchable. The plane lifted off. Maya closed her eyes, gripping the armrest as the turbulence began. Rain hammered the wings, every jolt sent panic racing through her chest. Her body remembered other hits, not from the sky, but from a man's hand. Her breath came short, fast, uneven. "Hey," a voice said softly beside her. "Breathe with me." She turned. The man was watching her, calm and steady, not pitying, just present. Slow, he murmured. Deep. Like this. She followed his rhythm before she realized she was doing it. Air began to flow again. The engine noise blurred into the cadence of his breathing. Better? He asked. She nodded, eyes down. But he'd already seen. The light from the window caught her cheek, the faint purple shadow beneath the makeup. He didn't speak for a moment, but the line of his jaw tightened. Who did that? He asked quietly. It's nothing. To some people, maybe. Not to me. There was no pity in his voice, only a calm authority that made her shiver. I don't want to talk about it, she whispered. Then don't, he said simply. Then added, after a pause, glancing toward the aisle, if anyone approaches you at the airport, pretend you're with me. Maya frowned. Why? Because some people shouldn't be recognized. Not by you. He turned back to the window. The conversation ended there. For the rest of the flight, he didn't sleep or watch the in-flight movies. He just sat there, perfectly still, as if the world itself moved around him. Something about his composure was both dangerous and magnetic, like an animal that could either kill or protect. When the plane began its descent, Maya caught her reflection in the glass, pale, exhausted, but for the first time, not afraid. She glanced at the man beside her. His hands were folded, his expression unreadable, every movement measured. She didn't know his name. But she knew this, if he said she was safe beside him, it would be true. And somehow, that terrified her even more than everything she'd left behind. New York greeted them with a gray dawn and the smell of coffee mixed with gasoline. Rain streaked down the glass walls of the terminal, and everything around seemed foreign, loud, alive, yet indifferent. Maya followed the flow of people, careful not to fall behind, and all the while she felt it, his presence beside her. The man from the plane, now without his jacket, just a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, veins dark against his wrists. He moved as if unhurried, but no one dared brush against him. People parted for him instinctively, as they do for something dangerous. Where are you flying next? She asked quietly, just to fill the silence. He looked at her, and something about that gaze made the noise of the terminal fade away. Doesn't matter. And you? Nowhere. Just away, she admitted. He nodded once, like he understood more than she'd said. As they approached passport control, Maya noticed 3 men near the exit. Ordinary jackets, but their stance military. One held a phone, and when the screen tilted, she saw it, a photo. A woman with short blonde hair. Her. Cold washed down her spine. Her chest tightened like before a blow. Oh God, she whispered. He found me. Who? My husband. Eric. I think those are his men. The man followed her gaze, his expression unchanged. Just one brief glance, sharp and assessing. Look at me, he said evenly. She did. Smile. As if you're with me. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, warm, reassuring through the thin fabric of her jacket. They began to walk, his pace calm, his posture radiating quiet authority. The 3 men glanced toward them, and then, almost imperceptibly, looked away. Maya's breath returned to her chest. Outside, under the awning by the taxis, he finally released her. They're not from him, he said simply. What? Those men weren't looking for you. They were watching me. The words fell between them like metal hitting stone. For you? Why? He gave a faint smile, not amused, not kind, just weary. Because some debts are never forgiven. Not even when they're paid. She didn't know what to say. The fear in her chest changed its shape. It was still fear, but no longer of him. There was something about him, that quiet, controlled strength, that drew her in and warned her to run at the same time. "You never asked my name," she said softly. "You wouldn't believe it anyway. Try me. Nick Marino." He watched her reaction carefully. The name meant nothing, but the way he said it, with that faint Italian rasp, made it sound like a promise and a threat at once. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you take this." He handed her a black business card, unmarked except for a single phone number embossed in silver. "If things get dangerous, call me." "And you?" "I'll find you faster than they will." She stood there, watching as he stepped into a waiting black taxi. The driver opened the door with the reverence of someone who knew exactly who he was serving. Maya's fingers tightened around the card. The paper was thick, almost heavy, like a promise she didn't know she'd made. When the car disappeared into traffic, she realized something inside her had shifted. Her fear was still there, but it had changed direction. Now, it had a name. Nick Marino. She didn't know if he was a savior or a predator. But for the first time in years, she didn't want to run. She wanted to know. The next day, the city seemed to dissolve into fog. The sky was the color of dull lead, and the rain fell lazily, as if it, too, was tired. Maya stood by the window of a small cafe in Queens, holding a paper cup of bitter coffee, unsure where to go next. She hadn't called the number, she didn't want to seem weak. But she still held her phone. As if he could sense the thought, the screen lit up. "Don't stand outside." No greeting. No name. A minute later, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down, and she saw him. "I told you I could handle it," she said as she slid into the seat, though her heart was pounding too fast for the words to sound convincing. "This is what you call handling it?" He glanced at her reflection in the mirror, pale, exhausted. New York doesn't forgive loneliness. They drove in silence. The city outside flickered past in streaks of graffiti and rain, wet bricks, rusted fire escapes, glimpses of other people's lives behind fogged windows. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "To my sister's. She helps women who've had to run." "Run from what?" "From men like me." He smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. The car stopped in front of an old red brick building. A small brass sign read Rose's Studio. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, paint, and something warm, like safety. "Nick," a woman's voice came from the back of the studio. She appeared a moment later, mid-40s, dark-eyed, graceful, her hands still stained with color. "You brought me another one from your storms?" "She needs quiet," he replied. "Then leave her here before you ruin it." They exchanged a long, silent look, something sharp but familiar passing between them. Then Nick nodded. "I'll be back tomorrow." "Better if you don't come back at all," Rosa muttered, though not unkindly. When he left, the air felt lighter. Rosa showed Maya a small room with a window overlooking a courtyard. On the wall stood a blank canvas, untouched, waiting. "Do you paint?" Rosa asked, handing her a set of brushes. Maya's fingers trembled as she dipped the bristles in paint. The first line was uneven but real. Then another. Then another, until the colors blurred through her tears. She wasn't crying from fear anymore, but from release. "No one will hurt you here," Rosa said gently. "But remember, my brother doesn't do anything without reason." Maya nodded. She'd known that from the moment she met him. That evening, Rosa brought her tea and an old wool blanket. "He's my brother," she said, sitting beside her. "We grew up among people who think power is the only language that matters. Nick isn't a monster, but if he chose you, it's for a purpose." "I didn't ask for protection," Maya whispered. "No one ever does. One day you just wake up and realize your gratitude has become a cage." The night was quiet. Rain whispered against the roof, and somewhere in the distance, a train moaned through the dark. Maya couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept circling back to him, to the steadiness in his touch, the way the world seemed to still when he was near. She didn't know who he really was. But she sensed that behind his silence was something far more dangerous than anything she had fled. At dawn, she went to the window and froze. Across the street, a man in a dark coat stood watching the studio. He didn't hide. When their eyes met, he looked away and pretended to light a cigarette. Maya understood instantly, he wasn't random. He didn't move like Eric's men, he was too controlled, too deliberate. He was one of Nick's. And in that moment, she realized that refuge was just another word for territory. She had merely traded one prison for another, only now, the bars were invisible, and they smelled of fresh paint. Days began to flow with a rhythm that almost felt like peace. The studio smelled of linseed oil, paint, and rain. Rosa worked in silence, an old radio humming soft jazz in the background. Maya stretched canvases, cleaned brushes, sometimes just sat by the window watching rain slide down the glass, turning the city outside into a blurred watercolor. Sometimes she thought she was finally breathing again, without Eric, without shouting, without fear. But at night, when the studio lights went out, she always noticed a dark car parked across the street. Always the same one. Always the same driver. Too still to be random. Rosa pretended not to notice, but one evening, as she handed Maya a palette, she said quietly, "My brother is good at protecting. He just never learned how to let go. He's just worried." Maya tried to argue. Rosa smiled faintly. Protection and control are two sides of the same coin. You never know which side will land facing up. On the fourth evening, a message came. "Come to the office. Bring nothing. N." Maya stared at the screen until the letters blurred. She didn't want to go. She wanted to stay in the scent of paint and rain, in the soft silence of Rosa's studio. But curiosity was stronger than fear. A black car arrived at exactly 8. The driver didn't introduce himself. He simply opened the door and said, "Mr. Marino is expecting you." The ride took no more than half an hour, yet it felt endless. Outside the window, the lights of Manhattan, the reflection of neon on wet asphalt, faces she would never see again. The car stopped in front of a glass tower. No signs, no logos. Just metal doors, and a guard who opened them without asking her name. The lobby was perfectly still, marble, glass, the faint scent of expensive coffee and polished paper. The elevator took her to the top floor. When the doors opened, she saw him. Nick stood by a wall of glass, his back to her. Against the glow of the city, his silhouette looked sculpted, clean lines, controlled posture, complete composure. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said without turning. "I thought so too," she answered. He turned. A glass of cognac in one hand. On the table, papers, maps, photographs arranged in deliberate precision. She recognized some of the faces. The men from the airport. "Who are they?" she asked. "The ones watching me." "But why?" "Because I'm the kind of man people watch." He came closer, set down the glass. You already suspected it, didn't you? That I wasn't just some man who happened to sit next to you on a plane. Maya said nothing. She had suspected. But seeing it, that was different. On the wall behind him hung a framed newspaper clipping, Nick in an immaculate suit, shaking hands with another man half hidden in shadow. Cameras flashing. The Italian headline read, Niccolo Marino, il nuovo capo della famiglia Marino. She didn't need to translate. The world shrank to a single point. She could hear her own heartbeat, nothing else. My God, she whispered. You're Mafia. He didn't answer right away. I'm the one who keeps chaos in balance. Who makes sure the streets don't drown in blood. Sometimes that means getting your hands dirty. He stepped closer. Maya moved back, not out of fear, but because something between them had changed forever. Why did you help me? She asked. What do you want from me? Nothing, he said softly. I just couldn't leave you there. You destroyed him, she realized. Eric. No, Nick said. I only made sure he couldn't hurt you again. He chose where to go. You threatened him? I gave him a choice. He took it. He spoke calmly, without remorse. That calm frightened her more than violence ever could. Do you think I'm a monster? He asked quietly. I think, you're used to being God, she said, her voice trembling but honest. They were silent for a long time. The city glittered outside, endless, indifferent, beautiful. Do you want to leave? He asked at last. Yes. Then go. No one will stop you. She took a step toward the door, and froze. Her shoulders shook, her breath caught. She didn't know what scared her more, his power, or the feeling deep inside that his power somehow felt safe. Why do I believe you? She whispered. Because I don't lie. I just don't tell everything. He came closer, his voice low, almost intimate. But remember, Maya, he said. In this city, no one saves anyone for free. Not even me. When she stepped outside, the rain had started again. Cool drops washed the fear from her skin but couldn't clear the confusion in her chest. The card with the silver number lay warm in her pocket, pulsing like a living thing. She looked up at the reflection of the tower in the puddles, tall, black, flawless. And for the first time, she understood, sometimes salvation and captivity look exactly the same. The studio still smelled of paint and rain, but something in that scent had changed. It had grown heavier, sharper, like a storm that hadn't yet broken. Rosa had gone to an exhibition, leaving a note on the table, "Don't open the door for anyone except Nick." Maya smiled faintly, the warning sounded like a verdict. She brushed gray into white on the canvas, blending the colors until they resembled a restless sea. The more she painted, the more she realized, the storm was inside her, not on the canvas. Since the night she'd left Nick's office, her thoughts hadn't stopped circling him. He was a contradiction made flesh, cold, dangerous, yet there was something in his voice, in the quiet way he looked at her, that felt almost like care. She didn't want to admit it, but she waited for him. Every evening, she found herself glancing toward the window, half expecting that black car to appear again. And when one finally did, her heart lurched painfully. But it wasn't his car. The glass on the studio door rattled from the blow. Then another. Maya froze. "Open up," came a familiar voice, and a chill ran down her spine. "Eric?" "Maya, I just want to talk." She instinctively stepped back, staring at the new lock Rosa had installed, heavy, solid, with a steel bolt. "Go away," she whispered. "Or I'll call the police." The police? His tone turned mocking. And what will you tell them? That you ran off from your husband to live on a gangster's charity? Metal scraped. The lock shuddered. He'd forced it. The door swung open, and he stepped inside, immaculate as ever, pressed shirt, that same smile that once made her heart stop. But now she knew what lived behind it. You've changed, he said, his eyes sweeping over her like over something he used to own. But don't fool yourself, Maya. I'm still your husband. You're nothing to me. He laughed softly, stepping closer. I'm your life, sweetheart. Everything else is an illusion. She backed away, stumbling against a chair. He grabbed her arm, his grip crushing. Let me go. We just need to talk. He's lying to you, that man of yours. Do you even know who he is? He's a criminal. A killer. I've seen his file. Stop. He's using you. You're just his charity project, something to ease his conscience. Eric's voice grew louder, closer, until it was almost a shout. His breath reeked of whiskey. Maya tried to break free, but he shoved her against the wall. And something inside her, months of fear, humiliation, sleepless nights, ignited all at once. She hit him. Not hard, but enough to make him stagger back. You should go, she said, her voice trembling. Now. You dare, he grabbed her again, and the door behind him opened. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The voice was quiet, almost gentle, but the air in the room shifted. Eric turned. Nick stood in the doorway, dressed in a dark coat, expression unreadable. Two men in suits flanked him, silent, still as shadows. Who the hell are you? Eric shouted. The man you shouldn't have looked for, Nick replied calmly. Eric pulled a gun. His hand shook. Maya didn't even have time to scream. A metallic click, and before Eric could pull the trigger, one of Nick's men moved. A flash of motion, almost invisible, and the gun clattered to the floor. Eric gasped, clutching his wrist. Not here, Nick said quietly to his men. They lifted Eric by the arms. What are you doing? Let me go. You'll leave, Nick said. You'll be given a ticket, cash, and a warning. There won't be a second one. Eric tried to speak, but one look from Nick silenced him. A moment later, he was gone. Silence returned as suddenly as the storm had begun. Maya stood against the wall, trembling. Nick walked toward her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. He won't hurt you again, he said. What did you do to him? What had to be done? You killed him? His gaze stayed steady, almost sorrowful. Sometimes death is too easy. Maya sank to the floor. Tears came soundlessly. He didn't try to comfort her, just stood there, quiet, solid, unshakable. Why do you always show up just in time, she whispered. Because you still think you can leave. She looked up at him. I'm not your property. I never said you were. But in my world, people pay for salvation. Always. He bent down slightly, his fingers brushing her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. The only question is, what will you pay with? When he left, the studio felt emptier than ever. Maya sat on the floor for a long time, staring at the unfinished canvas. The storm she had painted had turned into darkness. She knew there was nowhere left to run. Not to him. Not from him. Because Nick Marino was no longer just the man who had saved her life. He was the man who held her fate in his hands, and he was shaping it slowly, precisely, like an artist molding something fragile and irrevocable. Morning over the Brooklyn Bridge was cold and translucent, as if the city itself wasn't sure whether a new day was beginning or the shadow of yesterday refused to end. Maya stood by the railing, a letter trembling in her hands. The paper was damp from the fog, the ink slightly blurred, but the words remained sharp, the last ones she could ever say to him. Nick, thank you for saving me. But if I stay near you, I'll lose myself again. I need to learn how to be strong without your shadow. She slid the letter between the steel beams of the bridge, where the wind couldn't reach. Beside it, a white rose, fresh like a beginning, not a farewell. Then she stepped back and looked down at the river. Her reflection rippled, uncertain of who it had become. A fairy horn echoed in the distance, and with every pulse of sound, the noise inside her turned to stillness. She was no longer a fugitive. Nor a captive. Just a woman with an empty road ahead. 3 months later. A courier delivered an envelope to Nick Marino's office, no return address. Inside, a postcard. A sky painted in wild strokes of blue. On the back, only 2 lines. Learning to paint again. Learning to fly. He held it for a long moment, as if the thin paper carried more weight than it should. For a heartbeat, something human flickered in his eyes, then disappeared behind control. He set the postcard beside his files and picked up his phone. Find her, he said quietly. Just make sure she's alive. That same evening, in a small gallery on the edge of New Jersey, Maya opened her first exhibition. Everything felt calm, soft music, the scent of champagne, the warm glow of lamps reflecting off her paintings. But near the entrance stood a man in a gray suit, composed, watchful. He didn't approach, only observed. When their eyes met, he gave a brief nod, and vanished into the crowd. A chill ran through her. She didn't know who he was. But her heart knew that gaze, it belonged to Nick's world. Outside, the city lights came alive. New York exhaled its humid night air, and somewhere deep within it, a phone screen lit up with a new message. Target located. Tell us which state you're from and which part you liked the most. Subscribing is the best way to say thanks.